I think anyone who works in law enforcement, regardless of what role, whether it's a police officer on the street or it's a prosecution of it, I think we all are invested in one thing. We all recognize that part of our job is to improve the criminal justice system as we go on. It's not perfect. It's always there are human elements involved, and anytime there are human elements, is also always going to be uncertain outcomes. And so we should all be committed to find a better path of doing the things that we do. It's just as much as our job as it is the policing that we do or the prosecution we do. And you're right. People of means have the ability to provide better protections for themselves, and people who don't, often find themselves victim to it. There's a real issue there. But I want to talk about something else that I think often gets lost in this whole thing. We all recognize and accept that we need to improve the criminal justice system. Who's being impacted by the really extreme approaches we're taking? And working in law enforcement, I think you ask anyone in law enforcement, really it's those communities that supposedly we're trying to help the most. And what does the data show of the rise in crime? Who is it affecting most? Because I think we're losing that. Let's fix it, but also recognize what we're doing is causing real harm, irreparable harm in communities across this country.
I think that's exactly right. And this is something that it's an important thread that often does get left, sort of lost in the conversation. I think it's important to take a step back and just reiterate what often motivates a lot of the sort of more extreme versions of reform efforts that we've seen. And that is I think, again, sincere concern with things like racial disparities in our criminal justice system. And I think that it cannot be overstated the degree to which that motivates reformers. But what bothers me about that framing is that we often leave out the fact that there is a huge disproportionality in terms of victimization. And so if we are going to create a system in which the risk of victimization goes up, we have to understand that that risk is not going to be equally borne by every American citizen to the same degree. Crime is very, very, very hyper concentrated, both geographically and demographically. So, in this country, any given year, about 2% of U.S. counties are seeing about 50% of U.S. murders. And within those counties, crime is, very, very, very concentrated. So if you look at, a city like Chicago, for example, citywide murder rate might be, 18, 19 per 100,000. If you look at some of the more dangerous neighborhoods in that city, you might find a murder rate of 70 per 100,000, 80 per 100,000, 100 per 100,000, several times higher than what the citywide rate is. And what that tells you is that there are communities that are bearing an undue burden with respect to crime, and they're shouldering far more than a lot of other communities are, than most other communities are, right? The vast majority of the United States is as safe as the safest places in the world. Unfortunately, what we have in the U.S. are just more pockets of really hyper-concentrated areas in which crime just proliferates at an extreme level, and that's really troubling. But it's also demographically concentrated among young Black and Hispanic males primarily. So in my home city of New York, every single year for as far back as we have data, which is 2008, a minimum of 95% of all shooting victims are either Black or Hispanic. Almost all of them are male. In some years, it's as high as 98. That's one of the most pronounced and persistent racial disparities in our criminal justice data. And it doesn't drive nearly as much concern as the disparities in enforcement outcomes. And we have to understand that those disparities in enforcement outcomes, in arrests and incarcerations, are a function of disparities in victimizations. And so if the criminal justice system does its job, if it achieves its mission as stated by the people at the helm of that system, right? I mean, you talk to any police chief, most prosecutors, although that's becoming less true today, most criminal court judges, most lawmakers, they want to reduce crime. And so, and that's as true in the tough on crime space as it is anywhere else. And excuse me, if that system works, who benefits? Well, we have data on this. If you look at the homicide decline from 1990 to 2014, that decline added 0.14 years to the life expectancy of white men. Yeah. It added 1.0 years to the life expectancy of Black men. that is a huge disparity in the dispersion of the benefits associated with the success of the criminal justice system. And I think that just way too often gets lost in this conversation. And it's something that, I've really tried to bring back